So, have we got any questions? Anybody would like to get us started? Sadly, Lydia's had to go, but I do think we've got a colleague from M&S here as well. So, brilliant. Okay, thank you. What would you like to? Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Okay.
Hi,
Thanks, Steve.
It's Steve from Kingspan. It's one for Terry, really. You're saying about the zero carbon incentive.
Yep.
What was that? How much was it? Because obviously you offset it with FITs, but what was the zero carbon incentive that you got from the system that you've installed?
Is it? This is the mic, is it?
Yeah.
So incentive there, I didn't mean a capital incentive in terms of subsidy. It was all self-funded. Is that the question that you asked?
Yeah. Did you get
No, everything was all self-funded. So I think we were really proud of that achievement. What we've done there is a zero carbon rated building within a normal commercial model. It would have been the first industrial development in the UK had it not been for one that's up in Wigan that was done around 5 years ago, which it was a really great project. However, it had a lot of involvement from Europe with grants, etc. As a REIT, we're not really able to draw down on that. So no capital incentive other than using it as a really good marketing tool.
Selling tool. Yeah. The other one's for Jonny, and he sat. You're not up there, Jonny.
Sorry. Come on, Jonny. Don't be shy. Steve.
Yeah, your SRC, what are the costs involved in it?
A sliding scale. We've got some fixed costs because of the certification process. So that's to do with the QA and the sort of internal processes we've got. I think for a 500 kilowatt roof, it'll be about £5,000 base price. And then if you go up to a megawatt, it's going to be, I think, about 6.5 or 7. But then with more project complexity, so for example, additional roofs or storage, or it's in Inverness, then it's going to be more expensive.
Alban Thurston from Flexi Solar. Question, I suppose one to start off with for James and Kiran about the politics. I've also got a second question I'm thinking of, but I'll come back to that later on. Question on the politics and the reshuffle and stuff. Treasury and George Osborne being no longer with us. Do you see that as, is there any kind of light at the end of the tunnel, or is that a positive move in terms of anything that Hammond's on record talking about for green energy? Osborne was very, very closely associated with big projects, certainly with Hinkley C, certainly with fracking. Is there anything positive about Hammond that we know about, that the REN knows about, etc.? Pure political question.
First of all, I think it's so early, and I think what we were trying to say in the presentation is that you can try and get a flavour of what people have said before. It could turn out that Greg Clarke is, one of the ungreenest people in the Conservative Party, or turns out to be. I don't think that's going to be the case, but looking at his history, I think, again, looking at Philip Hammond's history, look at what he was doing around COP21 last year. He was certainly saying the right words. He certainly seemed to be committed, going above and beyond what the basic job spec of what you would do as Foreign Secretary was. So there is optimism there. Are there any journalists here? Good. Outside this room, there is no doubt that getting George Osborne out of the Treasury is a positive thing. He is. he was a huge block, and something that, if there are any DEC or former DEC civil servants in the room, will recognise that fighting certain blocks within Treasury has been one of the biggest battles they've had to face. And I think even when you've seen through Ed Davey, through to even Amber Rudd, just the huge battle you've got to take. And of course, with DEC being one of the smaller departments in Whitehall, they would have some significant victories, but they would lose quite often as well. So I think that's another bit of positivity you can see with DEC being merged in with BIS, is that it's a larger spending department, bigger budget, and a slightly bigger sort of hitting department. So lots of things to be positive about, and Osborne no longer being there is certainly one of them.
Yeah, I think the one bit I'd add to that is also Osborne was very closely associated with the Northern Powerhouses project. So that very centralised investment and stacking of the chips in one or two centres in the north, then we're likely to see a more even distribution of the infrastructure spend, whether that's energy or social infrastructure. So that's probably on the horizon, which should lead to more opportunities for not mega projects, but medium-sized projects across the north of the country.
Yeah, hi, Stephen Edwards from Catalyst Housing. Two questions. The first one was for Terry on the business model. I just wanted to get a sense of how much you had to shift on the PPA from pre-2015, post-2015 in terms of savings on market rates of electric. And that was my first question. The other question was a bit more general. I think there was a couple of statistics on the potential savings for electricity consumers on storage. I think it was 2.4 billion or something for storage, and then 8 billion for sort of a bigger package. And I just wanted to check on, is that actual savings for consumers themselves, or is that savings for the energy market in total? Obviously, as a housing association, we're kind of interested in the resident end of things in terms of affordability. So, yeah, I just wanted to get clarification on that. Thanks.
Okay, so on the PPA question, the rate that we would offer, the saving depends on what the incumbent is paying anyway. So an SME could be paying 30 or 40% more than a larger company would be. But in general, in percentage terms, pre-2015 FIT reduction, we were probably saving them around 30 to 40%. Post-FIT, maybe around 15 to 20. But the interesting thing actually is that since the tiering of the feed-in tariff has changed also, we're actually doing bigger projects. So there's less percentage saving, but a bigger, absolute amount of PV there. So, the net loss is probably 10 or 12%.
And on the statistics, the way they build up those statistics does look at the whole system cost. So the rationale is that ultimately consumer pays for the system that we have, generation and the infrastructure that's there. So if you design a better system, a more efficient system, then ultimately the value comes back to the consumers. But you're quite right, it's not as simple as you're getting 8 billion off your cheque tomorrow. So you do need to look at it holistically to see that benefit.
Thank you. Yep.
Auburn Thurston from Flexi Solar again. This time for Mike Smyth from Energy for All. We've heard the Marks and Spencer astonishingly, inspiring projects there, and I say that from a community energy perspective myself. Mike, from your perspective, do you see that? Are there kind of new cooperation models kind of opening up here between community energy in solar and corporate partners such as M&S?
We hope so. There's two issues, I think. One is the PPA price, which is obviously much more difficult now and requires much more optimization of the PV system to get it to work. Before it would work on most buildings. Now they has to be optimized much more for internal demand, and you have different east-west designs, for instance, are probably no longer suitable. The second thing is we will need. There were two particular problems, I think, dealing with the commercial sector. One is that surprisingly few roofs turn out to be suitable. Either because they're cluttered with things already, or because they simply can't bear the extra load, or at least the structural engineer won't say they will, even though they almost certainly could. So that's one aspect. And certainly with the big span buildings in shopping centres, that we had unexpected problems there. Pitched roofs tend to be much more suitable. The second thing is that whereas the cost of solar installation has to come down to make it work. And the big difficulty with the commercial sector are the lawyers, the surveyors, and the banks. The building thanks. Yeah. the building occupiers and owners and FM team are often hugely supportive, But if you're putting up a 50 kilowatt system, and then on top of that, the lawyers want to add a bill, which is perhaps 50% of the cost of the install, as happens, it tends to make it simply uneconomic. So Segra has obviously got an advantage there as an owner. It makes it much more difficult, though, with other structures. I mean, not Marks and Spencer's, but we worked with one of the big PPI providers on healthcare, and there the building owners were up for it. All the tenants were really keen. The FM people supported it. And where we fell down was getting the consent of the bankers. The estimated legal cost of the bank on a 3 megawatt portfolio was £750,000, and just it's completely crackers. And we had another one where we had, this was with Marks and Spencer's, one of the landlord's lawyers saying, solar, that's a specialist area, premium price, even though 1 in 30 buildings in the UK has it. This is a specialist area. So there's got to be movement there as well as in the solar industry. Well, potentially, but it's an issue, and it's an issue on the people.
I can't, in a clear conscience, let all of that pass. but I think there is a challenge there for the industry. The bankers are more difficult once they put the debt in. They're in a more difficult position because they basically look at the problem as, well, it's just a lose-lose for me because I've already got my money in. I just need to be paid back. For the lawyers, there's a new fee event, so we should be more intelligent about how we look at those problems. And you're quite right that a lot of rooftop solar and storage is relatively low capital value. So you've got to find more intelligent ways of implementing the changes. And you're quite right, there's a role for algorithms to an extent. Very well designed and bespoke ones can lead to very good value savings and the implementation of bulk solutions. The problem is if you're always bespoking for each individual small scheme, you're never going to get the efficiencies that you really need for the industry to take off. So, thinking about it up front and working out whether you've got a real pipeline will allow you to get the best value out of that. And you're right, everyone's got to be honest about where their value add is on the scheme.
Yep, Seema.
Hi there, Justin from Bureau Howard Engineering. A question pretty much generally at the panel, which is about storage, and to me it seems clear that it fits very well with PV and enables it to move forward, challenging some of the problems with intermittency. What's your general feeling about when we might be able to get some sort of traction on market reform to enable that to happen in terms of a time frame? And also specifically at Terry, is that something you guys are looking into as an owner-operator to try and look into that, or are you just happy with your PPA at the moment?
So for energy storage, we think it's something that's really interesting. We're always keeping an eye on new technologies, and obviously it does fit in really well. We always try to size our systems so we've got the minimum feeding out to the grid, because when that does feed out to the grid, we're losing the difference between the PPA and the export rate. Our business model is such that we build these buildings and then we hand them over to the occupier. We don't have any interaction with them once they're in operation. So we wouldn't be involved in any of the operational side of it. But having said that, I think we're going to get occupiers coming to us and saying, can you support us in the installation of this? And what we need to see there is some really strong case studies from products that are from reliable manufacturers that we can kind of trust. And once we can get that, then I think it's something that you'll see coming up on buildings as soon as it's viable.
I think on the timetable for when we can see changes, a lot of work's already gone into this, both with Ofgem and with DEC, so a lot of prep work's gone in. We were waiting for a call for evidence. You would assume now that the new minister will want to have a look at that, and that's probably been delayed a little bit, but I think that's reasonably close, and for me it's a really important consultation, that one. The previous minister's instructions were very much find the low-hanging fruit, and if it doesn't cost any money, get out of the way. So some of those wrinkles and some of those things, I think there was a certain momentum towards. That has been delayed, but I hope there is no reason, in fact you would assume that the enthusiasm that the last energy minister had will be sort of continued, if not added on, with the new Energy Minister and Secretary of State. So that's all hugely positive. But I would sort of, once that's there, engage with it. I think it's a huge area. I think certainly Biaz and the DEC team will be thirsty for knowledge. I think trying to find some of those easy wins which we all want and putting a quick time frame on that and showing how to do it best is really key. I think I do take the point that obviously they are going to be busier, but again, we haven't seen what that relationship between the Brexit unit and home departments is going to be. It could be that the Brexit unit does all of the Brexit stuff and the department sort of feeds in bits and bobs, but actually gets on with business as usual. I think these are things that we'll see in the next couple of months, but I certainly don't think government's going to grind to a halt and only do Brexit. I think there's an awful lot to get done, and I think the Brexit unit will be charged with the majority of that work. So I think I'm hopeful in this area. But for any real changes, we could still be in that year, 18 months to actually see real things happen on that.
There's a briefing event on Monday for the UK energy storage industry by the DEC team that is now at the ISP, and the team that is responsible for the budget that's supposed to be supporting that nascent industry. They've just been moved wholesale across with their budget intact. So it looks quite positive.
Ian Howard, Arora Renewables. General question really about storage. Obviously storage we can store excess PV and then use it, but equally we could just use storage to buy cheap electricity at night and then use it in the day. What do you think of the risk of the major energy suppliers saying, well, hang on a minute, why are we allowing people just to buy cheap electricity at night and then use it in the day? So actually we start to lose those benefits of the lower tariffs at night.
Great observation on where the value is. Completely agree. And from our experience, the major suppliers are fully engaged and know what their customers need. So are developing new PPAs that allow for that, so that they are sharing the benefits and driving some of that change. So they're in the tent rather than looking outside and criticising it.
I'd also say on the idea, I mean, looking at various, especially those first movers, I think trying to find either, well, debt or equity, and trying to find partners on an arbitrage only business model is going to be difficult. I think it's an additional bonus, but I think also there is that obvious point that if everybody piles in and tries to do the same thing, it actually cancels it out and you won't have a business model in 4 years' time. So I think there may be some sort of marginal, maybe a income stream, but I certainly wouldn't base the model upon it. I think as demonstrated today, there are so many other ways that you can find value, but I wouldn't necessarily say that's the major one.
Okay, probably got time for a couple more questions. Behind you there, Seema, please.
Thanks, Gaynor Hartnell here. This is more of an observation than a question, and I hope I'm wrong in this observation, but I'm quite surprised by quite how upbeat you all seem to be about the prospect of Brexit, because, I mean, the thing that I feel about it is, will it not give the new government more of an excuse to kind of cast aside all that green crap that they had to kind of deal with before? They'll no longer have the pressure of the European Union Renewable Energy Directive targets and that sort of thing. And do you fear there might be perhaps less of the opportunities and more of the backlash against renewables? Do argue me wrong, but I was just surprised, really.
Am I going to take
James? Yeah.
I mean, you're seeing the internal wing of the REA having a sort of this is a policy discussion. I think, firstly, you can only be positive, because if you try and meet the reaction in this current government with just negativity, you're going to get nowhere. So I think there is a certain part that you just have to sort of grit it and get on with it and try and see the opportunities. I also think, and it's the same thing with DEC, I think if you look at the future of it, you'd say that that's not great because the next incumbent may not see climate change as much of their job spec. But looking at the personnel they've put in, there are reasons to be positive about it. I also think with Brexit, there is a certain amount of, well, there are opportunities there as well. It's happened. The worst thing about it was always going to be the shock. Well, that's happened now, so let's try and get on and make the best of it. I think when it comes to targets, as I said, I think the 2020 targets is still key if you're in heat and transport, certainly if you're still looking for the renewable transport fuel obligation changes, if you're looking to try and still protect the RHI and interest in that, although solar thermal's no longer involved in it. But if you have got heat interest, then the RHI still would need to be underpinned by the 2020 target. You'd say the RHI looks quite difficult to justify without the 2020 targets as to where the conversation is at the moment. But on the future challenges and the 2030 targets that Europe having, I think they were pretty weak. I think you would look at actually the 27% target they had. Well, if they hit their energy efficiency target, you could actually see a decline in the renewables that were needed by the EU obligations. So the Climate Change Act for us is now, and has been for the last couple of years, the major policy driver that you've got to be talking to. It's certainly what Number 10 were concerned about, certainly trying to meet Carbon Budget 4 and now Carbon Budget 5. I think within DEC, a lot of that longer term, medium and strategic thinking was much more focused on hitting the carbon budgets than it was the EU targets. And every position we've taken, both when it comes to the 2030 targets as well as Paris, are so closely in line with what we had in plan with the Climate Change Act that they were sort of pointless as far as sort of adding. Paris certainly didn't add extra incentives onto us. It was just us achieving what we were planning to achieve through the Climate Change Act. So again, I can't sort of stress enough just how important those carbon budgets are, and what a strong and positive sign that the last Secretary of State and the last Prime Minister took in what was, for me, one of the biggest risks of the Conservative Party leadership. One of the biggest risks coming out of Brexit was that would have been delayed. That decision to have the Carbon Budget 5 would have been delayed. So it was a hugely reassuring sign of the government that they signed up to that. So if you didn't feel reassured, and if it completely missed you by that the climate budget, you should feel reassured that was done, and hopefully has found its way past the Lords today. I can't imagine the Lords are going to rebel today on it. It would be a surprise. So I think it's a hugely positive thing.
Speaking as someone who has a European Union flag on my business card, because we had some ERDF funding to set up the solar centre, I was a little bit shocked, along with many other people, and it certainly wasn't what I was looking for. But I think it's also worth saying that the solar industry has become very used to dealing with significant changes over the last few years. So, okay, maybe there's a slightly different order of magnitude or slightly different thing, but I think it's just another one to take on the chin and get on with it, as James said. And also, just in terms of the sort of reshuffling of government departments, I suppose I think it's quite good that we're going to have an industrial and energy and industrial strategy. That's got to be a good thing, and perhaps that can be viewed as a bit of a sort of putting energy slightly up the priority list as well around the ministerial table.
Can I ask a question? Just on, have you started looking at what regulations and standards that a lot of your work stems from? Have you seen what the effects or how much of that's going to be changing, and sort of what your views on that will be?
It's really, well, we have a feed-in tariff essentially because of the Renewable Energy Directive, and it's the implementation of that directive under UK regulations that is ultimately why we've got this. I think the wider BRE business has been able to diversify what we do, so with a lot of products like certification and a much broader sort of international market than compared to what we had a few years ago. So, and we have a reduced reliance on European funding projects, although personally, we've got one, my little bit of the BRE business has got one earmarked for January under European funding, so we shall see what happens to that.
If I may, just to wrap up, if I may just make one more comment in reply to Gaynor, I think really as an industry, all we need is a few more organisations with that foresight, such as SEGRO and M&S, who will invest in solar in its own right, so we can then go to government and offer them a solution without asking them to put their hands in the taxpayer's pocket. And I think we're so very close to that, and I think we're very close to having those business cases emerges that will allow us to do that. And then we're totally free of that government support until, who knows, they might decide to put it to try and prevent us. But I actually think there's such momentum behind the industry. I don't think we're going to need that support for much longer, in my view. So we'll break for lunch.
Just one last question.
Yes, Steve.
Obviously, business rates. How do all of you feel about overturning the business rates for solar? Because it's a massive issue. If you think on a 100 kilowatt peak system, £2,600 business rate is basically the amount of money you would make under the feed-in tariff. I mean, well, half of it. I mean, it's a massive problem. And how do you think that we're going to be able to lobby the government to overturn that? I know the SPA are looking at anything over 50 kilowatts up to 5 megawatts to make it not difficult. But do you feel that's
Well, I mean, I'll let the panel answer, but from my point of view, I mean, firstly, it doesn't apply to third-party ownership with the PPA model. It only applies to sort of owned systems, owner-occupied, self-owned. But I think also, this is a function of the standard process of the valuation office. It's not a policy intent, as I understand it, to increase costs for solar. It's just their standard process for revaluation. So all we need is a conversation through the new department, we hope, with the valuation office and wherever they answer to, and hopefully that can be resolved. So I'm quietly confident. I don't know about the rest of the panel. How you feel, James?
It's difficult because it's not within the minister's gift on this one. So it would involve a certain amount of haggling, and it would also involve a reasonable overstep on what has been an established process. So I think even if Greg Clarke desperately wanted to do it, I think he would find there would be pushback from the Home Minister, whoever's going to actually take over the valuation office. So, we'd get into certain turf battles there. I think DEC were very supportive of it. I think they've been working behind the scenes on it. It may not quite have got all the way up to the 5th floor, but I think there was work being done on it, and it's comforting to see that they're on top of the issues. But again, at ministerial level, things usually get quite petty and personal, so I don't know how that works out. But I certainly think you should be writing to the valuation office. We do need to put some strong research base to them. Sort of certainly the trade associations ourselves are going to be pushing on it. And really, I mean, that top line figure of 6, 7, 8 times, it is a real shock, and it is a retrospective change. And we could see the very real possibility of people starting taking panels off their roofs. And I think once we get into that situation, then I think that's a point where I think whoever is in charge of the valuation office really does have to look at this. And I hope that the new department, Biz, will be taking it on.
We will be having another question session later, so if you've got other questions, there will be further opportunity to put them to the panel. It's time for lunch. Don't know about everybody else, but I'm hungry, so we'll reconvene at 1:20 past. Thank you.